one is 207, as moved by Mr. Payne, who's the member for Calgary Fish Creek, and it's a discussion will take place with regard to client trust funds and their use and misuse or potential misuse by lawyers. Following that, Mr. Oldring, the member for Red Deer South, will be proposing a motion which deals with the impoundment of vehicles of persons who have been convicted of impaired driving offenses. Later this evening, the House will be continuing with budget estimates. The department to be dealt with this evening is Municipal Affairs. As of this day, 16 departments will have been examined in this budgetary process.
Let us pray. O Lord, we give thanks for the bounty of our province, our land, our resources, and our people. We pledge ourselves to act as good stewards on behalf of all Albertans. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Member for Edmonton Beverly, followed by Red Deer South and then Highwood.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill PR 9. It's the Hungarian Cultural Society of Edmonton Act. The purpose of this bill is to exempt the property of the Hungarian Cultural Society from municipal taxes.
The honourable member for Edmonton Beverly has moved first reading of Bill number PR 9, Hungarian Cultural Society of Edmonton Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number PR 9, Hungarian Cultural Society of Edmonton Act, introduced by the honourable member, Mr. Wasiak, is now read a first time.
Red Deer South.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill PR 7, the Alberta Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church Act. The purpose of this bill is to provide for the Constitution and powers of the Alberta Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
The honourable member for Red Deer South has moved first reading of Bill PR 7, the Alberta Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church Act. Those members in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number PR 7, the Alberta Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church Act, introduced by the honourable member, Mr. Oldring, is now read a first time.
Member for Highwood, followed by the member for Calgary-Milliken.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill PR 12, the Canadian Southern Baptist Seminary Act. The purpose of this bill is to provide for the Constitution and powers of the seminary.
The honourable member for Highwood has moved first reading of Bill PR 12, Canadian Southern Baptist Seminary Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number PR 12, Canadian Southern Baptist Seminary Act, introduced by the honourable member, Mr. Alger, is now read a first time.
Member for Calgary-Milliken, followed by Calgary-McCall.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce Bill PR 13, the German-Canadian Club of Calgary Act. The purpose of this bill is to exempt the property of the German-Canadian Club from municipal taxes.
The member for Calgary-Milliken has moved first reading of Bill PR 13, German-Canadian Club of Calgary Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number PR 13, German-Canadian Club of Calgary Act, introduced by the honourable member, Mr. Schrake, is now read a first time.
Calgary-McCall.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Private Bill 14, the Austrian-Canadian Society of Calgary Act. This act would exempt the Austrian-Canadian Society of Calgary from all municipal and school taxes for as long as the facilities are used by the Austrian community in educational, recreational, social, and cultural capacity. In order to protect and further multiculturalism in our society, I believe that the government, in cooperation with the municipalities, should commit itself to consider ways in which it can help these groups meet their many obligations to the community at large.
The member for Calgary McCall has moved first reading to Bill PR 14, Austrian Canadian Society of Calgary Act. Those in favor of first reading, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number PR 14, Austrian Canadian Society of Calgary Act, introduced by the honourable member Mr. Nelson, is now read a first time.
McCall.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Private Bill 15, the Polish Canadian Cultural Centre of Calgary Act, which would exempt this facility from municipal and school taxes for as long as its facilities are used to fulfill the various social, cultural, and educational needs of the Polish community. We do not support this and other cultural societies through tax relief and grant programs who risk fraying the multicultural fabric of our society, which we say is important to us. This would allow all cultural societies to be treated equally.
The honourable member for Calgary McCall has further moved for first reading Bill number PR 15, Polish Canadian Cultural Centre of Calgary Act. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number PR 15, Polish Canadian Cultural Centre of Calgary Act, introduced by the honourable member Mr. Nelson, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of Technology, Research and Telecommunications, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the 14th annual report of the Alberta Educational Communications Corporation as required by statute. It is for the year April 1st, 1986 to March 31st, 1987.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, filing a couple items. Yesterday, the Minister of Environment has stated that Alberta was, quote, the only jurisdiction anywhere in the world with a Beverage Container Act. I would like to file...
Honourable member, filing is just simply in the title, and please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to file with the Assembly, in order to educate the Minister and other members of the Assembly, 4 copies of the Beverage Container Act of Nova Scotia and 4 copies of the Beverage Container Act of New Brunswick, the other side of the world.
Introduction of special guests.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce to you and members of the Assembly some 24 grade 8 students from Parkdale School in the constituency of Edmonton-Norwood. Mr. Speaker, they're accompanied by their teacher, John Beaton. They're seated in the public gallery. I would ask them to stand and receive the traditional warm welcome of the Assembly.
Member for Vermilion Viking, followed by Calgary Northwest.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Legislative Assembly 19 grade 12 students from Central High School in Sedgwick in the constituency of Vermilion Viking. They're accompanied by Mr. Greg Martin, and may I add, he makes a special effort to ensure that the students of that area visit the Legislative Assembly to watch parliamentary democracy in action. May I wish these grade 12 students an abundance of health, happiness, and success upon graduation, and ask them to stand and receive the warm welcome of this House.
Calgary Northwest, followed by Red Deer South, followed by Bow Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you and to members of the Legislative Assembly a fine group of 90 students from the Fred Edward Osborne Junior High School in my constituency of Calgary Northwest. Accompanying them are their teachers, Dale Martin, Mrs. Teresa Simons, Mrs. Dawn Jones, and Mr. George Strakis. I notice that some of them are wearing their Calgary Flames T-shirts, and true to the spirit of Calgary, even in defeat, we support our team. I would now ask that they would rise. They're both in the public and members gallery for customary applause.
Red Deer South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, earlier this afternoon I had the honor of introducing Bill PR number 7, the Alberta Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church Act. Here to witness this historical day for the Alberta Conference of the Seventh-day Adventist Church are Mr. Don Corkum, President, Mr. Lloyd Jansen, Director of Youth and Health in both constituents of Red Deer South, Mr. Jerry Chipper, lawyer from Milner Still here in Edmonton, who helped draft the proposed bill, and Mr. Peter Miller, a lawyer from Calgary, who was also involved in the drafting. Mr. Speaker, these gentlemen are located in the members' gallery, and I would ask them to rise and receive the warm reception of the Legislative Assembly.
Bow Valley.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce two members of the Brookson District Chamber of Commerce seating in the public gallery. Our Nancy Dickey, manager of the Brookson District Chamber of Commerce, and Gordon Musgrove, the president. I'd ask to receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Labour says that Section 81 of the Labour Code reflects a definite government decision to ban consumer boycotts and support for working people involved in labour differences. Mr. Speaker, the Premier, on the other hand, on numerous occasions says that he does not have to answer for this decision because it will be debated at some time in the legislature. My question then, we want to know which it is, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Is the Premier saying that the Minister of Labour is misleading the House, perhaps inadvertently, in suggesting that a policy decision has already been made?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the Leader of the Opposition knows how legislation proceeds through this legislature. It is introduced on first reading, it then proceeds to second reading in principle, then every clause is studied by committee, finally third reading, and then Her Honour the Lieutenant Governor to approve it. It seems to me, Mr. Speaker, that at the subsequent stages that are available to the House, the concerns that the Leader of the Opposition and some members of his caucus have expressed can be brought to the attention of the House, and as always happens, the House listens and sees whether or not there is valid arguments being made, and then perhaps adopts that point of view. We'll just have to see as the legislation proceeds.
Mr. Speaker, what we are trying to do, and we can't have it both ways, as the Premier is aware, Bill 14, the Medicare bill, last year was introduced, and because of opposition questioning, hopefully the government came to their senses and stopped it. Now, my question to the Premier, we're trying to save the government some embarrassment again, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Premier, is Section 81 government policy or not? That's what we're trying to find out, because one minister says yes, the Premier says, oh, he's going to sit and wait and see what the debate is. Which is it?
Mr. Speaker, I won't hold my breath for the Leader of the Opposition to work very hard to prevent the government from having any embarrassments. I would say, Mr. Speaker, that the answer I gave to this first question still stands. Let's see how it proceeds to the House.
Mr. Speaker, you have the Premier saying we'll see how it goes, and you have the Minister saying it's government policy, Mr. Speaker. So I'm going to go on the assumption, because they haven't withdrawn it, that it's government policy. Then my question to the Premier has already been noted in this House that one of the reasons the Gaynors dispute came to an end was because of the consumer boycott. They were hurting. And my question to the Premier, is it the government's intent then deliberately to tip the balance in protracted labour disputes in favour of management?
Mr. Speaker, as I recall, the Gaynors dispute, while the member for Edmonton Highlands may be saying what reasons she felt, and now the Leader of the Opposition, that it ended. Frankly, I think it ended because we worked with both sides as a government in a positive way and brought them to a peaceful and happy solution.
Peaceful, yeah. Peaceful and happy solution, Mr. Speaker. That is a bit of a joke, sense of humor by the Premier there, Mr. Speaker. But my question is, again, to the Premier, because he has to accept responsibility for government policy. Is it the government's intention to bring Section 81 in, and is it their intention to tip the balance in favor of management, which is precisely what this bill does? Is this what the government is trying to do?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've answered it. I'll try it again. The government intends to bring the bill in, yes, and it will proceed through the House, and as usual, it goes through all the stages. We certainly feel that all labour legislation should provide a level playing field so that both management and labour can negotiate from an equal basis, their responsibility, and then they can come to an agreement. It may be, Mr. Speaker, that the legislation will prevent...
Forgive me, honourable member. Forgive me, I just want to have the back row sort of quieten down a bit so I could hear the answer. Thank you. Honourable Premier.
As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, perhaps the legislation will prevent grandstanding by the Leader of the Opposition on the picket lines. If there was anybody who did not help the solution to the gainers' strike, it was that political grandstanding by the Leader of the Opposition down there. Didn't help anybody, Mr. Speaker. It was the government who helped the workers and that problem to be solved.
Supplementary, Calgary-Buffalo.
I await the government's attempts to have me arrested when I get out on a picket line. No, I'd like to address this supplementary to the Attorney General. The Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, and I'm wondering whether he could tell us what formal process is in place for assessing in advance whether government legislation infringes the Charter of Rights, and was this process followed in respect of this specific legislation?
Mr. Speaker, obviously legislation which is proposed by the government goes through a lengthy process of consideration relative to all aspects of its proper framework within the Constitution of Canada, both in terms of the constitutional responsibilities laid out in sections 91, 92, 93, 92A, and so on, and the Charter of Rights, and that, of course, has been done.
Here's second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
See, government policy are going to throw the opposition in jail, Mr. Speaker, but I'd like to designate my second question, member from Edmonton Centre.
Like some central...
Mr. Speaker, yesterday in the debate on the Department of Hospitals and Medical Care budget, much of the smoke and mirrors cleared away with respect to operating funds for active treatment hospitals in the province. When the new Millwoods and Peter Lougheed hospitals and the new Lethbridge regional hospitals are taken out of the equation, the result is not a 6.7% increase for all other active treatment hospitals, but only a 2.2% increase. Will the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care today, for all the board members, the administrators, and others who run the acute care hospitals in this province, confirm that all that they can expect is a 2.2% increase, which is far less than inflation is running this year?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member was, I believe, in the legislature yesterday during committee study of the estimates of the Department of Hospitals and Medical Care, at which time I fully explained the budgetary provisions for the current fiscal year.
Well, what the minister didn't explain was why he got a 3.5% increase and Tory backbenchers got an 80% increase and hospitals remain the same, at 2.2. Will the minister assist the hospitals as he has by an added 2.5% increase for the nurses, the registered nurses increase? Will that 2.5% increase also be passed on for increases for registered nursing assistants, for health science administration people, for increasing...
Thank you, honourable member, for your succinct supplementary. Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is engaging in a duplication of the exact debate that was held in committee yesterday, and I appreciate, Mr. Speaker, you were not in the chair at the time, but I'm perfectly willing to enter into that debate if the question period is the proper time to do it, Mr. Speaker.
Answer the questions, Marv. That's disgusting.
Well,
That's disgusting.
Mr. Speaker, the minister did not mention in the debate yesterday that last year's budget forced 879 full-time equivalents to be cut and 620 beds to be closed. Is the message that the minister is sending out to all hospitals this year, whether they're at the Misericordia, the Royal Alec, the Calgary District, or Drumhell, or wherever, that they must continue to lay off staff and to close beds for this upcoming year? Is that the message they are getting this year?
Mr. Speaker, we announced in early January that there would be a 1.5% increase in the global operating budgets for hospitals. After the Alberta Hospital Association had made a settlement with the United Nurses of Alberta, we indicated to the hospitals that they should provide us with advice as to how they were able to adjust their budgets to accommodate the salary increases that they were having to pay. And we said to all of them, let us know what your concerns and problems are in terms of being able to deliver services that you have delivered before without reducing any services and without reducing any beds. And that dialogue is presently taking place between my office and the Department of Hospitals and Medical Care and some 128 hospitals across the province.
Well then, is the message that the minister is sending out to hospitals and those who work in them, whether they're health science people or registered nursing assistants, that they too must stage an illegal strike to force hospitals to come to the table for just and decent wages in the province, and by going on an illegal strike, only then will the minister come up with the appropriate funding for these in the hospital sector as well?
The honourable member again doesn't know what he's talking about. The member may recall that the Staff Nurses Association at the University of Alberta Hospital and the Cross Cancer Board entered into meaningful negotiations and obtained a settlement without, in fact, being out on strike, which was the exact duplication of what was finally concluded between the AHA and the UNA. So any suggestions that anyone was drug into a reasonable settlement are just not factual at all. Facts of the matter are that our hospitals in this province are funded better than any other hospitals in the country. There are some cost-effective measures that can be taken. The honourable member, yesterday we heard, in fact, from the honourable member from Strathcona and others in this assembly about ways in which we might save additional funds by employing registered nursing assistants to a greater extent than registered nurses. There's a number of things that can be done, and I've said to the hospital board chairman and their chief operating officers across the province, they have to take out a sharp pencil and look hard at where they can save additional dollars. And if they are unable to find any way to provide services, then we'll certainly look at the concerns they have.
Supplementary, Edmonton Goldbar.
Mr. Speaker, why not practice a little prevention? We preach it enough. Has the minister discussed any of his current priorities with the AHA, which would allow for some flexibility rather than require them to come begging as individual hospitals to him?
I've had a number of discussions with the Alberta Hospital Association, yes, but it's rather difficult for the association to make the case for each individual hospital because they vary so much in terms of the additional requirements they might have. Some of them have perhaps a lower caseload than they had a year ago, and some are much greater. Some have less discretionary revenue for a variety of reasons. So each hospital, the other thing that happens, Mr. Speaker, is on the salary settlement, there was one increment, which is an increase of about 2.5% for nurses with more than 6 years of service, and it depends how many nurses they have in that category. So each hospital is a little different, and I think the hospitals would agree it's more appropriate to discuss these matters on an individual basis.
Leader of the Liberal Caucus.
Mr. Speaker, a question today is to the Minister of Environment. Mr. Speaker, after the embarrassing show of ignorance yesterday about the Beverage Container Act, I believe it's necessary to maybe delve in a little deeper into other recycling issues. For instance, Mr. Speaker, the Alberta Dairy Board must decide whether or not to allow 4-liter plastic milk jugs to be used in the product in this province, which are virtually indestructible, and a decision in the next couple months, I believe. Now, to the Minister of Environment, given that many states which allow milk jugs to use are preparing legislation that encourages other forms of milk containers, will the Minister be recommending to the Dairy Board that they do not approve the 4-litre plastic jug.
Mr. Speaker, I have no idea what the Minister, the Leader of the Liberal Party is talking about when he says embarrassment from yesterday. And I would ask him to clarify that, please, because I think that he has embarrassed himself by making such a statement with respect to the Minister.
First, the question was, he said he had no idea, Mr. Speaker, talking about. I know that, Mr. Speaker. Let's hope that he wakes up by the time the third supplementary comes. We're speaking with regard to 4-litre milk jugs that are now being looked at by the Alberta Dairy Board as to whether or not they can be used. And since most environmentalists favor the plastic, hopefully down the road, biodegradable envelope or pouch, could the minister tell the House whether he's not going to recommend to the Milk Board that from now on 4-litre would be in plastic pouches?
Mr. Speaker, I remain troubled by the Leader of the Liberal Party's first statement that he made, and I'm not sure what the access is or the opportunity is for an honourable member to react to an erroneous statement made by the Leader of the Liberal Party. The Leader of the Liberal Party can sit in his chair and make any statement that he wants to make, but he'd better stand up and be counted. I would like nothing better than to challenge him on his, again, his lack of information, his erroneous statements that he's now perpetuated at least on one occasion. With respect to containers that the Dairy Control Board might choose to regulate in the province of Alberta, that matter lies completely within the confines and the jurisdiction of the Alberta Dairy Control Board. The dairy control industry in this province comes under a marketing board system, and should the Dairy Control Board wish to allow 4-litre pouches, 5-litre pouches, 6-litre pouches, there's actually no difficulty from an environmental perspective with respect to this matter. The item is not covered under the beverage container system in our province of Alberta. And needless to say, and of course, that what we want to see happening with all products and all containers in our province is they eventually become biodegradable.
Yep. Mr. Speaker, back again to the chairman of the local Flat Earth Society. Could I ask the minister, Mr. Speaker? You have a lot of them over there, Mr. Speaker. I'll introduce them to you someday. Mr. Speaker, to the minister, is he aware that the use of plastic jugs has been barred in many American states due to the fact that their use picks up use of household products like turpentine and other toxic waste and can't be reused again? Will he not at least realize that if he can stop the use of plastic jugs, we stop that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, not only are some jurisdictions in North America basically working towards that particular arrangement, the country of Italy currently has a proposal before its parliament that would basically say that by the early 1990s that all plastics will be illegal in the country of Italy, as I understand. It's for debate before the parliament. That's not an issue that just related to one or two areas of the world. Plastics have become a commodity of great convenience to citizens in North America. They're used in great amount of attention in our province of Alberta, and I've already indicated that eventually we would hope that in essence that plastics would become biodegradable and that they would self-destruct in our environment with a short period after the time that their usage has been finished. That is a matter that a lot of people in the Western world are spending a great deal of time attempting to resolve.
Thank you. Final supplementary.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, if the minister won't move to keep will not move to keep the plastic jugs out of Alberta, will he at least go as far as to bring them under the Beverage Container Act? You know, the only one in the world. You remember that one?
Mr. Speaker, finally we get to the rub of the whole question. Alberta is the only jurisdiction in the world, and I repeat it again, that has a Beverage Container Act. Irrespective of the fine research that the honourable member usually shows up in this assembly with, usually an article from the Edmonton Journal, which certainly is not considered in Alberta to be a source of fine accuracy or anything else. Might I provide, Mr. Speaker, just a little more amplification to what it is we're talking about when we talk about a Beverage Container Act. First of all, we talk about product. Secondly, we talk about the extent of the product.
and contrary to the researcher, the new researcher that the leader of the Liberal Party has, now some columnist by the name of Mark Eliza, who doesn't ask the question, do you have beer bottles and whiskey bottles involved in it?
Thank you. I don't want us to milk this issue to its final. Edmonton, Glengarry, and a supplementary, followed by Redwater Andrew.
Thank you. Another area of recycling to ask the Minister about. I'm wondering if the Minister of the Environment will insist that the new Alberta newsprint mill use de-inked recycled newspaper in the production line so they don't have to log off an area of caribou habitat.
Thank you. With due respect, the issue deals with milk containers. Redwater Andrew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the leader of the Liberal Party is against progress and free enterprise in this province, to the Minister of Environment, can the Minister tell me whether the material used in the plastic pouch and the plastic 4-liter container are different or the same?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I haven't had the good fortune yet of taking a look at the 4-liter pouch or the container, so it's difficult for me to ascertain quantifiably and scientifically if there is any difference in terms of their chemical makeup. But surely it goes without saying that, to repeat once again, that one of the things that we would like to see happen with plastic products is that we eventually move to biodegradable plastic products so that, in essence, they do not become a lasting negative with respect to our environment. And you know, Mr. Speaker, while I'm up,
Thanks. The member, the leader of the Representative Caucus, followed by Lloydminster, then Edmonton Calder.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the government with regards to government announcements on agriculture. On April 7th, in response to my question in the House, the Associate Minister of Agriculture said that an announcement regarding the Agricultural Development Corporation would be forthcoming. My question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is as follows. Until such an announcement is made, would the Associate Minister consider placing a hold on foreclosures, quitclaims, and land sales by the Alberta Agricultural Development Corporation to stop the loss of any young farmers in that interim period of time?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said on a number of occasions in the House, that request is simply not logical because many people want to get on with the decision-making that they are involved in and don't want us to impose a moratorium on them.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. Would the Minister consider an optional mechanism that could be optional in terms of the farmer and the loans officer that is dealing with the various young farmers in the field as of today, pending the announcement that is to be made shortly?
Mr. Speaker, the Agriculture Development Corporation is working on a continuing basis through their loans officers with their borrowers, those current and those currently not in a current position.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Minister of Agriculture with regards to the drought program. A number of calls have come to my office from constituents and southern Albertans indicating that the regional offices of agriculture are referring my constituents back to the MLA to get information on the drought program. Could the Minister indicate whether that is an accurate directive from the Minister, and is this a change in usual procedure?
Mr. Speaker, we indicated when the Honourable Premier announced this water program that we were hoping that this week we would have out the application forms and the informational brochures, and at the very least we would have them out next week. As the Honourable Member can appreciate, we just announced the program last Thursday. It does take a period of time for the information to flow through to our district offices. We're more than happy to work through the MLAs or through our district offices. If the Honourable Member doesn't want to work with his farmers, we're happy to do so. But if he wants us to do so, we're more than happy to do so also.
Mr. Speaker, a final supplementary, and that's not a fair statement. The minister knows that every MLA wants to serve his or her constituents. My final question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Minister of Environment. As chairman, I believe, of that drought committee, could the minister indicate when this full description of the various programs will be made available to the legislature for the benefit of the MLAs and as well various regional offices across the province so that constituents can take advantage of the program?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The other day when the program was announced, there was a press release that went with it along with details in terms of what the program was, and as a follow-through to what the Minister of Agriculture says, that within a matter of days from now there will be the pamphlets that will be printed and will be available, and the honourable member can be rest assured that all members of the Assembly will be getting a complete package of all of the applications along with the descriptions that go with it.
Yes, to the Associate Minister of Agriculture. Who among the agricultural organization in Alberta are against placing a debt moratorium on farmers being foreclosed by ADC? I've never heard such nonsense. Now, you indicated that they are against that. Which organization?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is requesting that we treat people who have not made their payments differently than we treat people who have been making their payments. Is that correct?
Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's, Mr. Speaker, is also supplementary to the Associate Minister. It's not a case whether they are making the payments, whether they can make their payments. Let the Associate Minister check with the Debt Adjustment Board to see whether or not she could not give back to that Debt Adjustment Board the same power they had in the 1930s, which is the power to set aside a foreclosure.
Mr. Speaker, we've heard the same question, I think, on 4 different occasions in the House, and I've said on every occasion, communication between the borrower and the financier is the solution to the problem, not legislation.
To the member for Lloydminster, Vermilion Viking, final supplementary.
Yes, I've had, to the Minister, supplemental, I've had several people approach me that have gone through the Farm Debt Review Board and their moratorium of some 90 days and have said that it has influenced their credit rating with banking institutions and other institutions. Will you ensure this House that you will not implement a moratorium in ADC that will affect their credit ratings of those that are trying to restructure their debts in the future?
Mr. Speaker, one of the considerations that we are giving to all of the solutions that we're talking about has to do with making sure that other financial institutions do not, in fact, restrict credit because of some decision that we make as a government. And I can give the member the assurance that we will continue to do that.
Member for Lloydminster, followed by Edmonton Calder, then Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Agriculture. And can the Minister indicate what programs have been put in place concerning the student employment in agriculture?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we announced yesterday that we are going to continue on with the 1988 Summer Farm Employment Program. It's the 17th year that this program has been in effect, and we're delighted that we continue on with offering a service not only to the farmers' regional needs as it relates to employment, but also to the further education of the students themselves.
Supplementary to the Minister, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister tell the House how many students will be employed under this program?
I'm glad to see that the honourable member from Westlock Sturgeon can count. Mr. Speaker, we are projecting that there will be 870 students employed during these summer months. During the 17 years that it has been in operation, 31,000 students have accessed this program, whereby we as a government pick up 50% of their wages to a maximum of $300 per month.
And a further supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister indicate where the information can be obtained on the program?
Mr. Speaker, as with the majority of our agricultural programs, they can access the information from our district offices. I should share with members of the public and honourable members here too that in the event that they wish applications, we can see that they are distributed to them from our office so that each individual MLA can access the application forms also. But I would suggest that they access it in a hurry, as it is a very popular program, and that we only go to a maximum of the students I indicated earlier.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister indicate whether a farmer can hire a relative, such as a son and a daughter, for example?
No, Mr. Speaker, one cannot access this program and hire a family member. The students have to be at least 15 years of age, but family members cannot access because it does cause additional administrative problems.
Thank you. The member for Edmonton-Calder.
Mr. Speaker, my questions are to the Minister of Social Services. In 1984, the provincial government brought forward a new Child Welfare Act to minimize departmental involvement in private adoptions. Members of the public at that time expressed great concern, and the New Democrat opposition at that time also raised the possibility that the bill would mean that unwed mothers would be pressured to sell their newborn children through baby brokers. The government was forced to back down and change the bill, but it did not learn its lesson. To the Minister, is the Minister's understanding that the legislation that she will soon introduce will eliminate private adoptions, or is it her intention to privatize her department's adoption services?
Mr. Speaker, I answered that question yesterday.
Supplementary to the Minister, I didn't hear an answer to that question yesterday. Supplementary to the Minister, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister tell us, when she introduces this legislation, if it will end the possibility of private agencies bidding against each other, trying to coerce distressed mothers to give up their babies for adoption?
Mr. Speaker, in response to the honourable member for Edmonton Gold Bar yesterday, I indicated, as well as to the honourable member who's asking the questions, that the legislation would be framed in such a way to deal with the best interests of the child.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it would be nice to get some straight answers from the Minister. Supplementary to the Minister again then. Will the Minister assure us, through the amendments to this legislation, that her department will conduct home study reports on prospective parents and will not open up the private consultants having a conflict of interest?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is raising all sorts of problems that she sees in something apparently that she has conjured up in her own mind, and I can assure the honourable member she'll have every opportunity to debate the legislation when it comes forward to the House.
Okay, well, Mr. Speaker, I can assure the Minister I haven't made this up in my own mind. There are a lot of concerns out there. Final supplementary to the Minister. Will the Minister then at least assure the Assembly that adoptive parents will not be charged finder fees? In other words, that she will not allow a two-tier system to develop based on the ability to pay?
Mr. Speaker, I think that the most important matter that we have to address is the best interests of the child, and I can assure the honourable member we believe we have taken the child first and foremost into consideration.
The chair in a moment. The chair will recognize Calgary Fish Creek, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar, and point out that the last question raised by a caller is identical to the question she raised yesterday. Calgary Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to suggest there's another side of the equation that's been raised by the honourable member, and I wonder if I could ask the minister, on behalf of a great many of parents who would like to adopt, can she clarify for the House that procedures and policies are in place to avoid undue pressure being placed by social workers on young mothers who, for various reasons, may be incompetent to provide the upbringing that their child should have?
Mr. Speaker, this is a matter that has been raised with me on a number of occasions because it's obviously a very difficult and to some degree subjective matter as to whether young people, particularly the children who are having children, whether or not they're getting objective information on which to base their very, very serious decision about whether or not to give up their child. And, Mr. Speaker, we hope that that is occurring, and I will be taking further measures by way of production of information that will be available to every parent who is thinking of giving up a child.
Edmonton Goldbar.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister tell us how many commercial adoption businesses, we hope licensed, now exist in Alberta, and the percentage of total adoptions that they are carrying out in the province?
Mr. Speaker, that is detail that will have to be requested on the order paper, and I believe that I would be able to supply it.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by Calgary Northwest, Calgary Forest Lawn, if there is time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, recently VenCap sent $18 million to the United States for the purchase of Sherritt Gordon Mines stock. Such an investment is inconsistent with VenCap's stated role of providing additional equity capital for financing new business startups in Alberta and of funding the expansion and diversification of existing businesses in Alberta. To the Premier, how does sending $18 million out of Alberta further this stated role for VenCap?
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Economic Development and Trade handles VenCap responsibilities in the government.
Would the honourable member repeat the question, please?
I'm happy to repeat it. Clearly nobody is handling VenCap. I will repeat the question, and this is my first question. How does sending $18 million out of the country for the purchase of Sherritt Gordon Mines shares further the stated role of VenCap?
Mr. Speaker, we have on a number of occasions dealt with questions in the House that relate to VenCap. And the honourable member, I believe by now, is aware of the legislation and the structure of that company, and that the company is arm's length from government. I believe that it is within the capacity of any member of the Assembly to express an opinion upon a particular action or activity of that company, and the honourable member is free to express an opinion on that investment, as is anyone else in the House.
$200 million of Albertans' money, and the Premier can't pick up the telephone to get this company back on track. Would the Premier please indicate to us whether it would not be more appropriate for this kind of investment to be undertaken by the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, leaving VenCap to do what VenCap should do, and not having VenCap do what other agencies of this government might be inclined to do?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is making an argument for something new to be considered. Perhaps he should put a resolution on the order paper and make his case.
Would the Premier consider the possibility of this kind of investment being taken more appropriately through a joint venture subsidiary with a company like Sherritt Gordon Mines, with the money being directly invested in that subsidiary and remaining in Alberta to be invested in Alberta and to create jobs here?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is raising an initiative which he'd like the House and the government to consider. I think there's appropriate ways to do it, and I would welcome the opportunity for him to put such a suggestion on the order paper and let the House consider it.
I'm overwhelmed. Can the Premier please give us some indication of how quickly he will act on these suggestions in an enlightened manner, since it seems that time and time again this government is losing focus on what economic development priorities should be pursued and instead seems to wander aimlessly from idea to idea without a...
Supplementary seems to be wandering a tad too. Please.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's the honourable member who's delaying putting it on the order paper. In terms of the government's economic development initiatives, let's be very clear. This government promised the people of Alberta that we would turn the economy around and get Alberta building again. The government has undertaken policies and programs to make that happen. This government promised the people of Alberta that we would diversify this economy, and we are making it happen. This government has laid out a plan for the people of Alberta for the growth of our economy, for balancing our budget, for reducing taxes. We're making those things happen. The people of Alberta know that when they have a government that gives them a plan and then lives up to it, that's the kind of government they like.
I wonder if they'd like to buy a $3 million golf course, because I can certainly sell them that. Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Economic Development, my understanding to the Minister is that VENCAP was really interested in the high-tech metal section of Sherrod Gordon. Is the Minister in a position to indicate if that's really what it was that they were trying to get, is something that's got an increase in new technology in the metals field?
Mr. Speaker, of course, the government isn't involved in the decision-making of VENCAP, but Sherrod Gordon's presence in Alberta is tremendously important. It is the largest, commits the largest effort of any private sector company in Alberta to research and development. And a great deal of its research and development has resulted in highly skilled jobs in Alberta and results in export of that technology. The company itself, Speaker, is important, and it is important to us that the decisions with respect to how that company operates in the future are made in Alberta.
The opposition.
To the Minister of Economic Development, the original mandate of VENCAP was to provide venture capital to diversify the economy and help small business, not buy into major companies. Right. My question is to the Minister, what would it take for this government to withdraw that $200 million and set up their own venture capital fund so they would diversify the economy and help small business?
Mr. Speaker, I believe the Leader of the Opposition's question is similar to the question raised by the Honourable member for Meadowlark, and it would be appropriate for the member to place a resolution on the order paper so that the members could debate it, and perhaps some ideas may evolve from the House that would be useful and might be considered by the government.
Member for Calgary Northwest. Calgary Northwest.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister of Economic Development. Mr. Minister, the VENCAP has a responsibility to other investors in the corporation besides the government. Should there be any disincentives to invest in other areas of the economy, and so that they wouldn't experience the problems of other financial institutions in Western Canada?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member is alluding to the fact that there are thousands of Albertans who are shareholders in VENCAP, and that when the company was established and the legislation was established, it was the clear intention of the government to not interfere in management decisions, and we have maintained that practice in practice as well as the requirement that is in place legislatively.
Member for Calgary Northwest, main question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Transportation and Utilities, in July of 1987, this government passed into legislation the Seatbelt Act. Could the minister tell us whether at this point in time, I realize it's a short period of time, whether his department has done an analysis of the effectiveness of this legislation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we haven't completed a final analysis of the legislation that took effect on the 1st of July, but the statistics released relating to accidents in the province of Alberta certainly give us an indication that there may well be some savings in particularly the type of injuries that occur, because the injuries percentage is down 13.5%, and that's down from about 22,148 injuries in 1986 to 19,169 in 1987.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Again, to the minister, will there also be a cost-saving analysis carried out by your department?
We're going to attempt to try and see if we can put together something related to costs. That's a difficult one, because it's the difficult part, Mr. Speaker, is putting the actual cause on the seatbelt itself. I think it's a combination of a number of things that have resulted in the decrease, and that's the use of seat belts from the July 1st period on, the awareness through education of the drivers, and then we've had an excellent winter as well.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, again to the Minister of Transportation and Utilities. Since the enactment of this law, I've received some letters, and certainly even last week, from a child asking if there will be consideration of including school buses in this legislation.
Mr. Speaker, as I said at the time that we were putting seatbelt legislation in place, the reason that seatbelts in school buses were not included at that time was the present design of the school buses, and that until something has been designed that will be a safer use, I would see the continuation of the plan that is presently in place across Canada and North America, whereby it's safer to have the children, if I may use the expression, bouncing around in the school bus as it is presently constructed, and until they come up with a new design, that would be considered at that time.
Member for Calgary Forest Lawn, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Sup, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if the main...
Westlock Sturgeon on a supplementary.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Has the minister had any indication at this short stage with the reduction in, apparent reduction in fatalities, whether there's going to be any reduction in insurance premiums by the private companies?
I have none at this time, Mr. Speaker.
Edmonton Beverly on a supplementary, followed by Little Bow.
Mr. Speaker, during the debate on the seatbelt legislation, communications was passed on to the minister from the transit operators from both the cities Edmonton and Calgary, requesting to be excluded from that legislation. The minister at that time indicated that he would review the matter in 6 months and notify. What is the position of what is his decision relative to that issue?
The question period has expired. Might we complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Honourable Minister, followed by Little Bow.
Mr. Speaker, relative to a review of any of the changes that will be made, that has started now, and that is one of the ones that is being considered, and I'm not giving any indication which way that may go. At the present time, we have no reason to believe that we would be changing our laws, but that was one of the requests that was made by a number of parties in the province for us to consider.
Little Bow.
Supplementary to the minister. Is the minister aware of a constituent from the Pincher Creek Crow's Nest constituency that was stopped in a stop check and didn't have a seat belt on, and as the policeman was approaching, the man quickly put the seat belt on, and the officer approached and said, "Do you always wear a seat belt?" And the man said, "Yes, I do." The officer said, "Do you always put it through the steering wheel?"
Orders of the day.